Day 6, which brings us on the direct way to the climax of the storyline, although there is not too much of it in the adaptations. William of Baskerville has still not been able to solve the mystery of the murders in the monastery in northern Italy. Only one thing is clear: the conference has failed, also due to the actions of Bernard Gui, and Remigius of Voragine, his assistant Salvatore, and the Rose will be taken away by the Inquisition and will die. Azzo is deeply unhappy about the fate of the Rose, a fate that came to her due to mistakes other people made. But on the penultimate day of his report, events pick up speed again. As always, let's take a look at the novel first. Another monk is missing at the early mass. This time it's Malachias. Distracted by the chants in the church, Azzo doesn't even notice how he suddenly appears in his seat. Relieved at first, since he was the one who last held the unfortunate book in his hands, he then had to realize that Malachias staggered and finally fell forward. As he dies in front of everyone, he utters his final words of having been warned that it really has the power of 1,000 scorpions. William can't resist teasing Bernard Gui about how this murder could have happened when the murderer is behind bars. Bernard only replies that he never said he caught all the murderers, but he would now leave whoever had done this to the abbot's strictness or overindulgence. And with that, he says goodbye. Of course, the death of the librarian throws things into confusion in the abbey. Speculations are going around as to who will become Malachias' successor, while Azzo points out that the 1,000 scorpions are again consistent with the apocalypse, and citing the text telling of the 6th trumpet. The 6th angel blew his trumpet, and I heard a voice coming from the 4 horns of the golden altar set before God. The voice said to the 6th angel holding the trumpet, "Untie the 4 angels who are bound in the great river, the Euphrates." Then the 4 angels were unbound, who stood ready for year and month, for day and hour, to kill 1/3 of mankind. And the number of the horsemen of that army was many thousand times 1,000. I heard that number. And this is what the horses and riders looked like in the vision. They wore armor of fiery red, smoky blue, and sulphurous yellow. The heads of the horses were like lions' heads, and fire, smoke, and brimstone erupted from their mouths. It's too many meanings for William, but he thinks it's entirely possible that the next murder will happen at or in the stables. He and Azzo talk again to the master glazier Nicholas of Morimont, who tells them that the order of offices is actually very clear. First you become assistant to the librarian, then abbot. And you could only become librarian if you had mastered more than one language. But in recent decades, the offices had been filled in other ways. Malachias allegedly did not speak any foreign languages, and Abbo only became abbot because his predecessor died a sudden and unexpected death. Also, someone had been passed over when appointing a new librarian. While Nicholas then shows the monastery treasure, which consists of all sorts of alleged bones of saints and parts of objects that are said to have had something to do with Jesus, William gets an idea, he says goodbye and goes to the scriptorium. Azzo goes to the church where he falls asleep and has a very powerful dream that spans several pages. When he later meets William again, William can also interpret the dream for him, which is a modification of an old farce that Azzo in his dream used to process the events of the last few days. And he gives William an important inspiration. Back in the scriptorium, William reviews the codex again. Malachias had told him that the books are entered in the order in which they were acquired, and based on the different writings, it can be understood when which librarian was in charge. William uses what Nicholas told him and Azzo's dream in addition. In doing so, he can narrow down when this mysterious librarian that Alinardos told about was in office. Even Benno now has something more to tell. He is afraid for his life after Malachias was murdered. Benno suspects that they no longer want foreigners as librarians. Also, many spoke of Malachias as a strawman who had been put in place to be controlled by someone else. William now learns that Benno only briefly opened the mysterious book, but did not read it. So you don't die from touch it alone, it takes something more. In order to finally clarify the situation, William speaks to the abbot, who in turn prefers to talk about gems, and wants the investigation to end immediately. William and Azzo are scheduled to leave the next day. The abbot dodges William's questions about the book everything is revolving around, only to explain that he's taking care of it himself and should have never involved anyone from outside. While unrest spreads in the monastery, William goes in his cell to meditate. Finally, during the evening service and the subsequent dinner, we see that Jorge is nowhere to be found, as is Alinardos. The abbot now goes into the library himself to lock it up. William and Azzo watch the entrance to the ossuary, as William wants to know what the abbot will do afterward, but he doesn't come out. Since there is still a possibility that the next murder will happen at the horses' stable, the two monks move there. Azzo recalls a remark made by Salvatore that he knew a magic that would make the third horse as fast as the abbot's horse. However, since Salvatore spoke more pseudo-Latin, he said tertius equi, which does not mean the third horse, but the third of horse. And the third letter of equi would be the U. Now William understands what the encrypted message means. The hand over the idol act on the first and seventh of the four, above the mirror, which obviously forms the entrance to the Finis Africae, is a saying from the Apocalypse, Super Tronos Viginti Quatuor. This is an excerpt from a sentence that reads in context, Et in circuito sedis sedilia viginti quatuor, et super Tronos viginti quatuor seniores, sedentis circumamictos vestimentis albis et in captibus eorum coronas aurea. Translated, it means, and around the throne were 24 chairs, and on the chairs sat 24 elders, clothed in white robes and having crowns of gold on their heads. To open the secret door, you have to press the first and seventh letter of the word quatuor, Latin for four, that is Q and R. William and Azzo go into the library again. as they do so, they hear knocking noises coming from the wall, leading William to suspect that someone is trapped in a secret passageway, of which there must be several within these walls. Then they reach the mirror room. William activates the mechanism and realizes that he was right. The mirror opens forward a little, and with the opening of the access to the Finis Africae, Azzo's report on the 6th day ends. As for the adaptations, things get difficult here. In both cases, not much was taken over from the original material. All the circumstances surrounding the mysterious librarian and how William finds out about him are missing. Unfortunately, a few details are missing that testifies even more to William's sharp mind. In addition, the fact has been lost as to why the two monks did not think of it earlier, how the mysterious spell means to open the Finis Africae, and it has something to do with the word quatuor. The saying doesn't just say quatuor, but viginti quatuor, that is 24. Since the two monks were used to speaking Latin, they read the two words as one number. Well, as the saying goes, something is best hidden when it is directly in the viewer's field of vision. Let's take a look at the film. Since William is under the supervision of the Inquisition here, Bernard Gui's guards are in the church during the service. When Malachias dies, William and Azzo take the chance to escape the guards by disappearing into the ossuary and into the library. Meanwhile, one of the monks discovers that Malachias has a black tongue, just like William said, to which Gui replies, "Yes, he knew, just like I would have known if I had been the murderer." This accusation from Gui is completely overblown as far as the story is concerned. A bit later, we'll get to that on the next day, Azzo will somewhat naively believe that Gui could be persuaded with fact by his master presenting him the real murderer, or that Gui is being brought before the Pope himself. No, this Bernard Gui will not be convinced by anything. Walking through the library to the mirror room, Azzo notes that the two still don't know how to open the secret entrance. And here William is doing something for the second time what I critically noted about the entrance to the ossuary. He suddenly has an inspiration out of the blue. William, maybe by pressing the first and seventh letter of the word four. Azzo, but four has only 4 letters. William explains what he means, and of course he's right. At the same time, something happens that is not in the novel. Bernard Gui has the pyres built for Remigius Salvatore and the Rose outside the edificium, in front of the abbey. That's the countdown I mentioned earlier that's supposed to increase the excitement. But how exactly this happens is explained in the next episode, because this runs parallel to the events in the Finis Africae. Something more was brought into the series. After Malachias' death in the church, Bernard Gui says more or less the same as in the novel. What is new here, however, is that he does not want to leave, but wants to have the pyre built for the heretics in the abbey. Azzo then has the conversation with William, in which he complains about that the little people have to pay for the crimes of the great ones. This prompts William to talk to Gui again. Gui is sure of victory and thinks that the Franciscans are finished. William turns the conversation to the girl and confronts Gui with the fact that he personally lit the pyre of Fra Dolcino and his companion. An inquisitor must adjudicate. He must not become the executive hand. William wants to get the Rose free. Gui goes into the dungeon and talks to her in Occitan. In terms of plot, however, the conversation doesn't change anything, except that an, in my opinion, unnecessary arc of suspense is built in. Whether Gui will change his mind or not, he of course doesn't do that. He just orders that the pyres be erected and lit when everyone is at church in the evening. so that it is done behind the backs of everyone else. Parts of the conversation with Benno appear in the series. So does the conversation with the abbot, in which William explains what he found out. Here too, the abbot demands that his guests have to leave the next day. As William and Azzo cross the abbey courtyard and William is distraught at the thought of not being able to solve the riddle, a horse is heard whinnying, reminding Azzo of Salvatore's saying about the tertius equi. Again, it is this tip that is the right inspiration. As in the novel, the two enter the library and hear someone knocking in the wall, although we as the viewer have seen before that it is the abbot, stuck between two secret doors. While the two advance to the Finis Africae and open the secret door, the pyres are built outside. So there's a countdown here too, even the same as in the movie. In the foreword to the book Signs in Umberto Eco's novel The Name of the Rose, Burkhard Kroeber writes something that also goes very well with the adaptation, even if he is actually writing about critics. As Renato Giovanoli wrote in his introduction, the critical examination of The Name of the Rose is an endless work in progress, in which each contribution across all countries and disciplines builds on the previous ones and inspires the following ones. One could also say that it is a collective exploration of the labyrinth that the novel both describes and depicts, and in which, as with labyrinths, some also get lost. The same can be said of the adaptations, because ultimately an adaptation is nothing more than an examination of the source material. Sometimes you come across something that didn't really work in the novel and you leave it out or change it. Some things read very well on paper, but do not look so good visually. We see that in the adaptations of the library maze itself. In the film it was made three-dimensional to make the viewer feel lost. In the series it remained a collection of rooms and you could never really see how it was three-dimensional. We also find the connection and inspiration that Kroeber describes, because the fact that time pressure is built up at the end of the plot by setting up the pyre for the heretics and the rose is something that the film and series have in common, although it does not appear in the book. And ever since I started writing this series, I've been thinking about whether this is a good idea as an addition or not. I really don't know. I have a strange feeling about this countdown in my stomach. But on the other hand, I'm not sure if the ending described in the book, Gui leaves with the prisoners and we never know exactly what happened, would have appealed to moviegoers so much. As far as the series is concerned, however, the scene with the pyres is embedded in all sorts of other things that are not from the novel. For example, the conversation between William and Gui, while very well written and once again a good example of the keen mind of the Franciscan, gets lost in the broader context of the filler. The confrontation is very well managed on William's part, as he tells Gui that he, as an inquisitor, is not allowed to carry out sentences himself. Then comes the scene where Gui talks to the Rose in the dungeon. Rupert Everett plays this very well. You never know if Gui is feigning the understanding he has for the Rose, like he did with Salvatore before, or if he's really considering letting her go, although not out of pity, but only because of William's admissions that he was previously guilty of breaking the rules. The problem in my impression is what I described already. This scene leads nowhere. We have the same problem again. The plot has come to a certain point and the events can't get in the way of it. And then there is Anna. Again, it's an almost bipolar feeling. The scenes in which she hides in the dungeon, watches everything and even dares to try to free the Rose are well written and staged. In one scene, Anna squeezes through an opening in the wall that is barely wide enough and disappears into the shadow just in time before the guards come in. But it all just doesn't quite fit. What I haven't really mentioned yet is that, like the novel, the series is told in retrospect from Atso's first-person perspective as an old man. And while we already see in the movie more than Atson could have seen, the series totally spirals it out of control. For example, Atso could not have known exactly what happened with Bernard Gui on the journey from Avignon to the Abbey. While this happens from time to time in the movie and is limited to isolated scenes, much of the action portrayed in the series is something that Atso neither witnessed nor could have been told by anyone. Now, well, as it is often the case, if the rest of a story is coherent, it is easier to overlook such details, and with the series I can't quite manage that. But, well, maybe it's just me. And now we have finally arrived at the climax of the story. One more day is missing from Atso's report and the epilogue, and we will take a look at both.